Hi, everybody. I hope everyone's doing well. One of the things that's happening here in Ohio is that they have shut down barber shops. So I'm getting hairier and hairier. If this keeps up, I might have my hair as long as when I was an undergraduate. Might even dig up a picture of that and show you what it looks like. Anyway, a couple reminders before we get started today. We're going to have our quiz coming up. I'll give you more details on the format later this week. The quiz is going to be on Monday, April 13th. I'll give you a window. You can have a certain amount of time to do it within a window of, basically all day Monday. I'll work out all the details. And shortly after I post this video, I'm going to put up a sapling assignment for Chapter 21. So what I want to talk about now is the idea of the labor force and unemployment, really what those ideas mean and how we can measure them. We speak oftentimes about the idea of a dashboard. And a dashboard just means it's a way of displaying various measures of performance. So you can see here I have a little photo of a car dashboard. It tells us a lot of important things. How fast we're going, don't want to get a ticket. By the way, this looks like kilometers, I hope. What gear we're in, the tachometer, the gas tank, that's always worth knowing. Is your engine overheating? How much gas mileage you're getting, how far you've gone, etc. So it tells you all these important things. If the whether or not you need oil, if the check engine light is on, whether or not your tire pressure is low. This is the dashboard. You don't want just one measure. You want a lot of different measures. And the relevance of that is we want an economic dashboard. Several measures that will tell us how's the economy doing, not just one measure. And as part of this dashboard, it includes the things we've been talking about. GDP and its growth, earnings and income, inflation, productivity, and what I want to talk about today, employment and unemployment. As we complete this idea in Chapter 21 of employment and unemployment, what we'll have here is a measure of what the macroeconomy looks like, how well it's doing. And what I'm going to do next is begin to put together a model that will explain how the economy is doing, that what determines the measures of all these, what will affect things like GDP, inflation, and unemployment. So first we get the measures, then we get the model. Okay, we know that that labor is a market that does not always clear. And what I mean by that is, usually we say where supply intersects demand, we have an equilibrium. The market clears means that everybody who wants to buy will be able to buy, everyone who wants to sell will be able to sell. In the market for labor, that means everybody who wants to hire a worker would be able to find one, everybody who wants to work will have a job. But in the market for labor, there's a surplus. More people want to work than jobs are available. And this surplus is what we refer to as unemployment. And what I want to talk about is how do we measure all these things? Because you hear about this in the news all the time. So the government conducts a survey. It's called the Current Population Survey. Every month they go out and survey 60,000 households. The sample is one where households participate for a while, then they bring in new households. So we are getting a random, actually a sample of people in the United States. Now, questions are asked. And one of the things they ask, this is very important to pay attention to, is what did you do last week? Did you work? Did you not work? And based on these answers as to what you did the week before, and the survey is always done in the week of the month that has the 12th. Based on that, you're classified as either a member of the labor force. This is a measure of labor supply. You're a member of the labor force. What that means is you're either working, you're employed, or you're unemployed. You're willing to work, you're seeking work. So it's a measure of labor supply. And if you're not a member of the labor force, then you are not a member of the labor force. Now, all of these terms have strict definitions. Let's look at them. To be employed means that you worked for pay in the previous week. That's the question. Did you work for pay in the previous week? Even 1 hour, doesn't matter how many hours. There are separate questions that look at part-time, average hours worked, but the definition of employee is you work for pay. Now, what happens if you have a job where you work on commission? Real estate agents try and sell houses. and their pay is based on the number of houses that they sell. So if they don't sell any houses, they don't get any pay. Same thing with an automobile salesperson. The result is, in this definition, since both these people are trying to earn money, they're still considered employed. If you had a job, but you didn't work for a non-economic reason, in other words, you had a job, but you were ill, you're on vacation, there was bad weather, or you were on strike. If you didn't work for a non-economic reason, such as these, then the result is you're still classified as employed. And finally, if you worked in a family business without pay for at least 15 hours in the previous week, you're considered employed. Now, sometimes somebody works in a family business and they're not getting paid, but they hope that sometimes they'll be able to take over part of the family business. So that's why they use that definition. These definitions are set by the Department of Labor. And if you work for pay for 1 hour or are in a family business, even if you didn't get paid for at least 15 hours, you're classified as employed. Unemployed means that you don't have a job. That's kind of obvious, but you have to be actively looking for a job. And there are strict definitions about what actively looking means. Actively looking means you contacted employers about a job. You directly emailed, called, or stopped in person and said, "Do you have a job?" Or you asked employees of a workplace, "Are there any jobs where you're working?" Or you contacted a public or private employment agency. If you just go online and see who's hiring, that doesn't count. You have to take an active action to be counted as unemployed. Not have a job and actively looking for one. Suppose you have a job and you're working and you're trying to get another one. You're considered employed because you have a job. Now, the only exception to this is when workers are temporarily laid off. So, for example, recently Honda said to their employees here in Ohio, in Marysville, Ohio, "Look, we're not selling many cars. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay you off. We'll call you back to work." In fact, they've said that they're going to call them back to work on May 1st. We'll see if that happens. But these are workers that say, "Look, if I'm only going to be out of work for 3-4 weeks, I'm not going to get a job as good as this. I'm not going to look for work." So if you're temporarily laid off, you don't have to look for work. So what we see is, based on these responses, you can be a member of the labor force if you're employed, unemployed, meaning that you don't have a job and you're actively looking. I have a wonderful granddaughter, Ruby. Ruby's about 4 months old. She doesn't have a job and she's not actively looking. Ruby is not a member of the labor force. Her mother is staying home with the kids. She doesn't have a job for employment. Lord knows she works very hard. But since she isn't working and she's not looking for work, she's not a member of the labor force. I have friends, I know we make all kinds of assumptions in this course, friends that have retired, they don't have a job, they're not looking for one, they too are not members of the labor force. So here are the measures that we use to measure what's going on in the labor force. The first one is called the labor force participation rate. This is a measure of labor supply. What share of the population, we usually just look at adults, but what share of the population is in the labor force? What that means is that they're either working or actively looking for work. So how many people, what share of the population is either employed or unemployed, divided by the population? The most common measure that we see of the labor market is the unemployment rate. In other words, how many people are unemployed divided by the labor force? Here's a little thing that it sometimes trips students up. Notice, these are the definitions used by the government. Labor force participation, the denominator is the population. Unemployment rate, the denominator is labor force. We're saying of all those people that are in the labor force, working or unemployed, what share are unemployed? Of all those people who want to work, what share of them can't find work? And finally, the last one is the employment ratio. What share of the population is employed? So let's work through a little example. Suppose there are 100 adults. 60 of them are employed, 10 are unemployed, 30 are not in the labor force. So we can just calculate this. The labor force participation rate, how many are employed or unemployed? 60 plus 10 are in the labor force. 70% of the population is in the labor force. Of that 70 that are either working or want to work, 10 of them are unemployed. So the unemployment rate is 14%. And 60% of them have jobs. You might want to pause or look at the slides, which I'll post, and write down these three definitions because I'm going to be giving you a problem involving this in just a minute. So what we see here is these are the measures of the labor market, part of our dashboard. Now, what if 4 of these unemployed workers in our example give up looking for work? They say, hey, there are no jobs. We've looked and looked and looked, nobody's hiring. So they give up. Once they give up looking, no, that's not COVID. Once they've given up looking, they are no longer unemployed. They're called discouraged workers. They want a job, but they've given up looking because they don't believe there are any jobs out there to be found. So now we originally had 100 adults, 60 employed, 10 unemployed, and 30 not in the labor force. 4 of them have given up looking. They're discouraged workers. So now instead of having 10 unemployed people, we have only 6. 4 of the 10 have given up. You calculate the new values. You might want to pause this here, pull out your phone. You can look at the PowerPoint, or if you wrote down all the formulas, see if you can calculate the new values of our 3 measures of the labor market. Okay, what we found out is only 6 people were unemployed. 4 of the unemployed people stopped looking. So they were no longer in the labor force, they were out of the labor force. Our labor force participation rate fell. But notice something. The unemployment rate, which had been 14%, is now only 9%. Still 60% of the population is working. When we look at these numbers, what we see is the unemployment rate doesn't always give us the best measure of what's going on. In this case, the unemployment rate fell dramatically, but the share of people working in the population didn't improve. The labor force participation rate declined. If people stop looking, they're no longer considered unemployed, and that doesn't mean we're any better off. Point. You really need all of these measures in your dashboard. So, you might want to review these numbers, these formulas, because we're going to be using them a lot in the next lecture. Now, in the next video, I want to talk about what is happening now. And one of the things that you can see is that things have started to get worse. So in the next video, I'm going to show you what the actual numbers are, talk about how things have begun to change, and discuss what I think is going to happen to these numbers going forward. So stay well, wash your hands, and pick up the next video. Take care.